Hello there and welcome back to my channel, or if this is the first video of mine you are seeing, then welcome. I've done a video like this before on my channel but I think in that video I only included 5 palettes. However, a lot has changed since that video went up. I want to say that video was probably over a year old, and a lot of the palettes that I mentioned in that video are not even available anymore. They were limited edition palettes. So I have pulled out, well now I'm saying 10 because there are 2 minis that I'm just going to count as 1 so I can cheat a little bit. But I'm just going to say these are 10 palettes in my collection that if I could only keep 10, these would be the ones that I would want. Or if something happened to my collection, these would be the palettes that I would immediately reach for, because these palettes are just so beautiful. I love every single one of them. I'm going to go ahead and say they are all neutral palettes. Neutrals are what I definitely love. If you can just see by my background, I love this sad beige cream thing going on here. I like that. Which, speaking of, I know it's not fall yet, but I found these 2 little beigey pumpkins at Dollar General yesterday, because I wanted something in that spot for fall when I was planning on decorating on September the 1st. However, I come home, put these 2 here, and absolutely love the way they look with my background, and now I don't want to move them. But I don't feel like they scream fall like too much, and that's the only thing fall related that I even have in this room. But I wanted something on this side because the candles were getting on my nerves. So I love that. I love that so much, and they were very inexpensive, which I love. We love affordable decor. Okay, I'm going to start with drugstore. I will have timestamps for you below in case you want to watch just the drugstore or the high end, and I will also be showing you swatches of each of these palettes as I'm talking about them. But the first one here is from e.l.f. This is one of their bite-sized eyeshadow palettes, and this one is in Rose Water. I don't know what it is about this little palette that I have always loved so very much, and mostly I don't even really use this deep shade on the end that much. I'm mostly using the other 3 shades in the palette more so than that one, but I love to use that shade as sometimes like a liner if I'm doing that. It does have some shimmer in it, so it's not a shade that I would want to put in my brows per se. I think it would be an okay shade maybe for my brows if it didn't have the sparkle, but I don't really want to put that in my brows because of that. This is actually my second one of this little palette, because my first one I accidentally dropped it on like really hard floors and it shattered everywhere. There was nothing I could do to fix it, and I immediately went back and repurchased it. So I don't know what it is exactly about this little palette, but I just think it's really pretty. I love that it just gives you the most simplest look. It's very compact, so the shades are already put together for you to create a really easy, simple look, and I just really adore this palette. I don't know what it is. This one's probably the only one I'm going to mention here that's a little more maybe rosy. The rest of the palettes look more on the neutral side, but I don't know what it is, but I really do love this palette, so of course I had to mention it. I will say that there are more palettes in my collection that I would love to have mentioned. However, a lot of them have been discontinued, and I didn't want to mention any kind of limited edition or discontinued palette. I wanted to make sure I was talking about palettes that you could go out and buy right now, or if something happened and I had to repurchase, they were available for me to do so. The next one is from ColourPop. There's a lot of ColourPop in this category. I just think they do eyeshadows fairly well at a really good price point in my opinion. This is the That's Taupe eyeshadow palette. I have loved this palette ever since I purchased it. I'm not sure if you'll be able to tell, but I have pretty big dent in this shade, which is the shade Boa, and then I have a little bit of a dent in the shade next to it, which is Pebble Beach. I would love to hit pan in one of those shades. In fact, I would love to hit pan in at least 1 shade each in all of these palettes I'm going to mention today, because I feel like that would really validate what I'm saying. I love all of these palettes, but because I rotate my palettes around so frequently, I find that it's very rare for me to hit pan on an eyeshadow. So these are palettes that I would love to leave out, maybe have like a good little display system for them so I can access them at any moment, anytime, and maybe get some more pans in these palettes. But when I purchased this palette, I was not too much into the cool tones at the time. I was only wearing warm tones like the pretty orangey browns or the oranges themselves or yellows. I was more so into those shades, but now I just kind of had a connection with this palette and I just really love it. I love just how cool tone neutral this palette is. It's so beautiful. I love that you have like all variety of textures in here. And these shimmer shades, I want to say this shade, which is Slated, that might be a Super Shock shadow. I'm not exactly sure 100% about that, but I just think this is a really beautiful curated palette. If you love cool tone neutrals and you just want a little 9 pan, I don't think you can go wrong with this one. It's beautiful. Okay, the next ones are also from ColourPop. The rest of them in the drugstore category are going to be from them. I just think that their palettes are amazing, especially when it comes to the neutral palettes. I can't speak a lot for their really colorful palettes, but the neutrals I really love. This one is the 1111 palette from ColourPop. I love this palette so so very much. And I think one thing that I did really love about it is I believe this was kind of like their response to the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette, which is my all-time favorite palette. So I like that they kind of did their own little twist to it. I mean, it's not like exactly spot on. There are a few things that are a little bit different. Now, the only thing that might keep somebody away from this palette is this shade right here, which is the shade Reflect. It is a glitter. Now, I will say that ColourPop has definitely improved their glitter formula. Like, it's not as chunky as their pressed glitters used to be in those palettes. I think that this is much more of a smoother glitter, but I understand that even so, some people do not want to put that around their eyes, which fair enough. But I do want to mention that I think personally the formula has definitely improved. So if you were wanting to put it around your eyes, do so at your own risk, but I just don't feel like this is as chunky as they used to be. But I just think this is a beautiful palette. I just think this is one of the most beautiful palettes that they have come out with. There's just something about these neutrals that get me. I just love the neutral tones. I don't know. I know that it might be boring for a lot of people. I understand that. You know, I know a lot of people love colorful eyeshadow, and there's nothing wrong with colorful eyeshadow. I think that's so beautiful, but it's not what I personally want. And if I'm going to be spending, well, not so much in this category, but in the high end, if I'm going to be spending more money, like a lot of money on an eyeshadow palette, it's going to be a neutral palette, because I feel like that would be a way to get my money's worth more so, because I do have a colorful palette in my collection that was way too expensive. I should have never purchased that palette. It's a beautiful palette, but if I'm going to put that kind of money on a palette, it should be for a neutral. But I wanted to mention this one. I'm so glad it's still available, because sometimes when they do these little collections, I'm always afraid they're going to take the palette away. But it's still available. You can still purchase it, so I'm super happy to see that. The next two palettes, I think that if you are looking for maybe two larger size affordable palettes and you want a more neutral warm tone and then a more neutral cool tone, I think these two palettes would be all you need if you were someone that you didn't really want a lot of eyeshadow. The first one is the Bare Necessities palette. This is just a beautiful, stunning, classic palette. I mean, look at all these absolutely gorgeous neutral tones. I just don't think you can go wrong with this kind of palette. These are beautiful. And what I love is that it goes like, you know, this really fair shade all the way to a black shade. So you definitely have a variety to work with. You have some of these lighter and then more mid-tone, but then you also have some deeper shades too if you love to add a lot of depth. And well, just to make the palette more versatile and more available to everyone. I just think this is just a really beautiful, well-rounded palette. We have mattes, we have shimmers, we have some of those satin shades, and then of course like the mattes with the glitter. Are those called satin? No, I don't know if that's what they're called. What are they called? Sequin, that's what they're called. I know some people don't like those. I don't personally mind them, because I find that when you put them on the eyes, a lot of times the glitter kind of, you know, moves away anyway when you're adding the shadow, but I just think this is a beautiful, well-rounded palette. If you love more of these warmer tone shades, this is a gorgeous, gorgeous palette. I don't know. I've always loved this palette for a very long time. I just think they did it very well, and it's beautiful. And the next one here that I'm going to mention is the best sister palette to this one. And that is the Stone Cold Fox palette, which is the cooler tone version of the Bare Necessities palette. And this is equally just as stunning. Now, I will say that I haven't gotten as much use out of this one as I have Bare Necessities. I had Bare Necessities a lot longer and was really digging into that one before this one even came along. This one might have come out the next year or not long after Bare Necessities, but I think it was a while before I even purchased it. But if you love these more cooler tones, these more neutrals, I think you would love this palette as well. This is why I mentioned that if you were someone who wanted just maybe two large size palettes in your collection and that was all you wanted, I think this palette and the Bare Necessities would be the perfect palettes, because I feel like you get 30 shades, and I want to say these palettes are like, what, $30, $35. I'm not exactly sure how much they are, but I feel like they're worth it. Especially, I mean, considering the amount of shadows you get, the range, like going from these really light shades all the way again to a black shade. I just think they did these palettes very well. I have no complaints with them, and they perform beautifully on the eyes. I've never had any issues, and that goes for all of these palettes I'm going to mention today. These are truly palettes in my collection that if I lost them or had to go back out and repurchase for any reason, these would be the first palettes I would want back in my collection, because I think that they are all worth it, and they are definitely the color stories that I really love. Are they basically the same palette? Yes. And when you see the swatches going across the screen, yeah, they're basically going to be the same palette. You could probably create the same look using every single palette that I'm going to mention today, but for me, they're different. They're all different. They're the same, but they're all different, and I love each of them. So that's all of the drugstore palettes, so I'm going to move on over to the high-end options. Okay, the next two palettes are the ones that I said I'm just going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to count them as one palette, because more than likely, if I had to repurchase these, I'd repurchase the two of them together. They are both from Natasha Denona. The first one is her My Mini Dream palette. And one thing about this palette, if you have the I Need a Nude, then you really have these shades. They're not like the exact same shades, but I have a video on my channel where I created a look using this palette on one eye and then a look using similar shades to these from the I Need a Nude palette on the other, and basically you can create the same exact look with that palette as this one, but I would still want this one in my collection because some days you just want to reach for a mini palette where all the shades are laid out for you. They're just nicely curated for you already. I mean, not that the other palette is overwhelming or anything, but I mean, for those days where you just want something quick and easy, you can throw this all over your lid, you can deepen it up with one of these, throw a shimmer, you're done. That's all you need. And if you are someone that travels, I personally don't. I stay at home a lot. But if you are someone that travels, I think these palettes are also very nice options. Now, I'm not sure how fragile they are with traveling. I've never traveled with them, so I can't speak for that. But regardless, I still think their size is perfect for that too. And I would still want this. I know that I have the I Need a Nude, which is one that I definitely favor, but I love the idea of this little 5-pan. I just think it's so pretty. I like the shades that was picked out. I feel like you have a nice like lighter tone, a mid-tone, a deep tone, and then 2 shimmer shades. I just like this little palette. I wanted to mention it because it is one that I would definitely repurchase. And the second little mini is also from Natasha Denona. This is the Mini Starlit eyeshadow palette, and this one is beautiful. I don't know. This palette is just so stunning to me. It's just this teeny little 5-pan, but I don't know. The looks I created with this palette are just so lovely to me. They are shades that I would definitely reach for on an everyday basis. And one thing that I love about this is this deepest shade in here I could technically use for my brows too if I didn't necessarily want to wear it on my eyes, because I don't wear a lot of dark shadows on my eyes. Sometimes I do. It just depends on my mood. But lately I've just been wearing kind of like what you see today, which I mean, it's just a very soft light brown shade all up in the crease, and then I'm wearing like a little bit of like a golden eyeshadow as a liner, which you can't even really see it because of the mascara. So I just think this is so pretty. And then you have some of these more, you know, pops of warm tones in this palette too, and then it's kind of like warm tones and cool tones mixed. So I think you get like, even though it's a 5-pan, I still think you can get kind of a little variety of looks with this palette too, and I just think it's so pretty. I know she has a new one, like the Mini Rose palette maybe. I still kind of want to pick that one up. I don't know if I'm going to, but a part of me wants to, but I don't know. But I do think these palettes from her are very nice, and if you don't want to purchase the, what do they call them, midi sized palettes, like the, I think, what are these, $69, and you just want like a little mini option, I think these are like what, $27, $29. So there is that option too if you didn't want to pay the 60 something price point for the little bit of a larger palette. I think these are a nice option, and you start accumulating a bunch of these and you can have you like a little custom palette right then and there. So I'd like that option for these as well, but they're really lovely quality. I love Natasha Denona's formula. I never have an issue with it. So of course she was going to be featured, well, going to be featured quite often in this high-end category. The next one is the one that I am wearing on my eyes today, which very, very softly. This palette, I believe, has been around for a long time. It was a palette that I picked up a lot later, like not right when it first launched, and I just think it's a beautiful palette. Now, how you feel about Too Faced? I know some people love them, some people hate them. I mean, that's fair enough. But this is the Too Faced Natural Eyes palette, and I just love this packaging. This pink and this gold just get me, and then there's the little heart-shaped clasp on the end here, and then when you open this up, you have this, and now it's going to reflect, so I'm going to try to hold it a certain way. You just have this really beautiful, simple color story. This is just a lovely palette. Now, it does have a scent. It kind of reminds me of the Tarte ones a little bit, but a little bit stronger. However, I don't think it's unpleasant. It's like a sweet scent, which is what I like. That if eyeshadows have to be scented, which I don't really know why they would be, but if they have to be, I would rather them smell a little more sweet than like florally perfumey. And I know the last 2 little mini palettes that Too Faced released, I know one's cool tone, one's warm tone. While the quality of that little palette is so good, and I would have loved to have included it maybe in this category, I can't get past that really strong fragrance in that one, because that one's more of a perfumey. It's too much. It's too much. But this one I think is pleasant. And what I love about these shadows is they are so soft. They're very easy to work with. They're easy to blend out. All I'm wearing is, well, I set my eyeshadow primer with this shade right here, which is the shade Heaven. Then I used Strip Poker just like all over my lid, all the way up to my brow bone. And I'm using the shade Honey Pot as like a little bit of a liner. And that's all I'm wearing. And I think it's a really easy palette to work with. It's another one that I would say would definitely be beginner friendly, or if you're someone that you don't really want to spend a lot of time blending out eyeshadows, you want something that's just very simple, I think this is a good palette. I just think it's so pretty, and it's nice and weighted, so it's not like a cheap feeling compact. I just think it's lovely. And if you're someone that you like to have palettes like this out on display, I can imagine how pretty this would be sitting on a vanity. I love this. This pink and gold, That's really what attracted me to the palette in the first place, but then the quality of the palette is what would make me want it again. It's a beautiful palette. I really do love this one. What would I be doing if I did not mention a Tarte palette? I know that Tarte kind of has their moments with people where people think they're boring, they do the same palette, and they do. But for me, I don't mind it at all. I love their eyeshadow palettes. They can get me like no other brand can. I don't know what it is about this brand. Every time they come out with stuff at the holidays, I'm thinking, yep, add to cart. For no other reason than it's just pretty and it's neutral and I want it. But this is the Tartelette in Bloom eyeshadow palette, which I think is definitely a classic for them. I know it used to be, I'm not exactly sure. Now this is another one that reflects. I'm not exactly sure now. Also, I don't know if my face keeps going lighter and darker. I think it's when I'm holding these palettes up. So if you notice that, that's what's happening. This palette used to be like on the very top bestsellers list on Ulta or Sephora. I can't remember. I think it was Ulta. So I feel like this palette is still very popular. Maybe not so much people who are really heavily into the beauty community, but like average makeup consumers, I think really adore this palette, and I can definitely see why. And I've said it a million times about Tarte. I think they are such an easy brand to work with. I do not struggle one bit with blending these shadows out. They work beautifully. They have that really soft, lovely, sweet scent to them. It's not very strong in my opinion. Now, the Too Faced one I just mentioned, it's a little bit stronger than this, but it's still a sweet scent. But this one, it's just lightly scented, and I don't mind that personally. And I don't know, I just think they can do neutrals. I think that is definitely their wheelhouse. I think they do it very well. I don't know, I just think that their eyeshadows are just lovely. They're very easy to work with. They blend out quickly. It's just a pleasant experience every time I use their shadows. I don't feel like I'm struggling or, I don't know, it's really hard to blend or something like that. I just think that their palettes are beautiful. And now, unfortunately, I know they release some palettes a lot of times around the holidays that are limited edition. I know they recently released an anniversary palette, I want to say, and it's very pretty. I'm not going to pick it up though. I want to, but I'm not going to because sometimes I feel like I need to kind of lay away from the limited edition stuff because in 6 months to a year, it's not going to matter anymore. Whereas palettes like this that still exist all these years later are more important, really, because consumers can still go out and purchase these palettes. They're part of the core line of a brand. So I know I'm going to fall prey to limited edition stuff. I always do, but I don't want to try to do it a lot, if that makes sense. And Tarte's one of those where they come out with these palettes around the holidays that I want, but at the end of the day, they're limited edition and they're not going to matter in 6 months to a year. So, but this palette, absolutely worth it. This is a beautiful palette. I can understand why anybody would want this one. It's a classic for a reason. The next palette is my all-time favorite palette. I love and adore this palette so very much. The Natasha Denona I Need a Nude. And if you've paid me any attention in the last couple of months, or well, I say ever since this palette got released, then you will know how much I talk about this palette. I love and adore this palette so very much. And another reason I really love this palette is the versatility. Because she has these little holes in the back of the palette where you can pop out the pans, I love to use shades like this one, which is Wit, and then the shade Vague. I will pop them out and use them as blush. I've used the shade Silhouette in my brows. I have used some of these shades like this one and this one, which are Mesh and Stone. I've popped them out and used them almost like a cool tone bronzer. Well, I guess it would be a contour, but I don't really contour. I do more of a bronzing thing with them. And you can even use some of these shades as highlighters if you want. I love how multitasking this palette is. In fact, I have a video on my channel where I'm showing myself using it in that manner. I just think this is a gorgeous palette. I don't think a palette is ever going to come along that I love more than this palette. I really don't think so. And if it does, then it must be something very special because I have not loved a palette like this since the Urban Decay Wild Greens palette came out. I don't know what it was about that Urban Decay palette, and unfortunately that palette has now officially been discontinued. For a while you could still purchase it from their website, but you can't get it now, and I'm sad. I'm devastated. I love that palette. In fact, I have pan in that palette, and I have backups of it that I found at TJ Maxx that I purchased. I love that palette, and I don't think I've loved a palette like that until this palette come along, and I really, this is a lovely, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous palette. I never want to be without this one. This is one that if I dropped it right this second, it crashed on the floor and broke, I'd pause this video and I'd go purchase it immediately. That's how much I love this one. So this is one that I definitely want to start hitting pan on. I really want to validate what I'm saying here. I don't want it to look like I never touched these palettes. When I do, it's not enough like an everyday basis for me to hit pan because I like to rotate my eyeshadows around, but these are palettes that the rest of this year and coming forward in years, I want to try to hit it pan in at least one shade each. I'm just going to make that a goal for myself. One shade, that's all. Just one shade. I'm hoping I can do it, but this palette, everything. And the next one is also from Natasha Denona. I know she's featured quite a lot, but I love her eyeshadow palettes. I think her eyeshadow is just beautiful. It's stunning. I think they're well worth the money, in my personal opinion. I think they're well worth the money. This is now this one definitely reflects. This is the golden eyeshadow palette, and if you are a warm tone lover, then you will absolutely love this palette. All these beautiful, gorgeous, warm tones. Oh, can you imagine pulling this palette back out for the fall? Yes, for the summer, beautiful, but ooh, I can see this being a fall palette because we got these beautiful yellow golds. We have these beautiful, more warm, bronzy tones. Ooh, and I could just see this as a beautiful, gorgeous go-to fall palette. This is a stunning palette. This is another one that you can pop out. Now for me, for my skin tone, there's no blush shade in this palette, but you could pop out probably any of these more lighter tones, you know, if you're around my skin tone, and use them as bronzer. Maybe I ought to try that. I haven't done that with this palette yet, but I think that this is kind of like the warm tone sister of the I Need a Nude. I think they are beautiful paired together. I don't know. I just think this is a lovely palette. And the same thing with this shade Fog or Log? Log, can't read. This shade, I like to use that in my brows as well because it's a perfect tone. And I like knowing there's a shadow in palettes that sometimes I can use that way, especially if I'm just kind of, you know, multitasking for the day. I love that option as well for me since I don't really wear a lot of deep shades on the eyes. I still want to use those shades in palettes, and if they happen to match my brows, then it's a perfect way to do it. Sometimes, like I did today, I'll add a little bit of a liner, but it's not something I do a lot. But if I can wear it in my brows, if I can use it in any way, then I'm definitely going to use it that way. I mean, why not? This is just another really beautiful, stunning palette from her. I really want to pair this one up more with the I Need a Nude. Maybe do like a palette bingo with the two of them. I think that would be a really fun thing to do, and just kind of mix and match the tones together and see what kind of look that it would give you to come up with. I just really love the idea of that. But that's all. Well, technically there's 11, but we're gonna say 10 palettes that I would want back in my collection immediately if something happened to my eyeshadow and I had to repurchase, or if someone absolutely told me, no, you could only keep this amount. These would definitely be palettes that I'd want to keep because I love every single one of these palettes. I think they are well worth the money for the high end if, and only if, you are looking to splurge. But however, I think the palettes from the drugstore are equally just as good. Those are beautiful palettes as well. And probably in the two, especially the two larger ColourPop palettes, if you like the idea of any of these high-end palettes but you didn't want to pay the price point, those palettes, you could probably easily recreate any look from these palettes I just mentioned if you were more of a drugstore person, which I definitely understand. But I do hope that you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, I hope you will please consider leaving a like, a comment, or subscribing if you haven't already. Make sure you hit the bell icon so you are alerted to all my future uploads, and follow me on Instagram at jessicadeerly. All of these palettes will be listed and linked for you below. They are affiliate links, so if you click through and purchase, I do earn a small commission. And if you choose to do so, thank you so very much for supporting me and my channel. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!